Welcome to the first programme since our exit from the European Union, and joining us in the studio this week we have the leader of Warwickshire County Council, Conservative Izzy Seckham, former Brexit Party MEP Rupert Lowe, Labour MP Pat McFadden and Vinanda Mandani, founder of Talk About, a group which sets up events and online forums where young people can discuss politics and the other big major issues of the day. So Vinanda, what were you doing at 11 p.m. on Friday night when we left the European Union?
I was halfway between watching Say Yes to the Dress and on Twitter.
Say Yes to the Dress. OK. Now, I was expecting, as the youngest member of the panel, that you were going to be the one who was like, yes, well, I was out doing something exciting, but you were actually watching TV.
Do you know, it's surprising because you had the full range. Some people you'd be on Instagram stories, other people are watching TV, other people on a night out. It felt like business as usual.
Yeah, and how about you, Pat?
Very quiet, had my dinner, went to bed, nothing unusual on Friday night.
OK, I'm going to turn this way now, and I think there might be slightly different evenings spent at this end of the sofa. What were you doing, Rupert?
Well, after packing up my office in Brussels, I went and partied to celebrate the liberation of our freedom.
Right.
From an establishment that was reluctant to honour the will of the British people. So I was partying with my fellow Brexit MEPs.
And what did that partying entail? What were you doing?
We had a wonderful event where we all gathered and celebrated the return of our sovereign country.
OK, and how about you, Izzy? What were you doing?
Family curry, followed by home, reasonably early night, I'll be honest. I was listening to it all on the radio at 11 o'clock, hearing fireworks going on outside.
Right. Did you raise a glass at 11 o'clock?
Of coffee.
Of course. Gosh, coffee before bed. I almost think that's more bold than what Rupert was up to. Well, there you go. That's what we were up to here on the sofa. Let's have a look back now at how Brexit unfolded.
Run, save her away. Send her victorious.
We're all black country people, we all get on with each other. Yeah, a few people disagreed, but the majority of us were all for Brexit. We're all going to go forward together. It's going to be a success. No fallouts here.
The most important thing to say tonight is that this is not an end, but a beginning. This is the moment when the dawn breaks and the curtain goes up on a new act in our great national drama.
Well, there we go. Prime Minister Boris Johnson almost sort of referencing Churchill there, wasn't he, in those words? But he did describe this as a new dawn. What did you think, Izzy, or what have you thought during Friday and since about sort of the tone of kind of the celebrations and what happened?
I think it's been actually quite a well-managed affair. There's obviously been a lot of excitement from some areas, but we must remember that a lot of people are very worried, very concerned. You know, they're thinking about their futures, their businesses. So it's managing the celebrations in a quiet and responsible way, I think.
And do you think that has happened? Has it been quiet and responsible?
In the area that I've seen, yes, I think it has.
Because, of course, you know, you were having quite a fun old time, weren't you, on Friday? And there was a little bit of a hoo-ha in the chamber in the European Parliament, which caused a bit of a stir. I mean, was that deliberate? You guys had planned to kind of wave your flags and cause a bit of
Well, there's more to the flag issue than
of course, so to explain to viewers, you're not allowed to take national flags into the European Parliament.
We are the elected MEPs, and the diktat from the Commission was suddenly in Strasbourg 2 weeks before that we couldn't all have our little national flags on our desk.
Right, so that was why.
Actually brought a lot of colour to Parliament. So part of that went back to, if you like, a private MEP issue. Yeah. And I'm pleased to say that quite a lot of the other MEPs from other countries have now taken up that issue with the Commission and quite rightly have said, we are the elected body. If we want to have our flags on our desk, we should have our flags on our desk.
I mean, did you stay in the chamber were you there for Auld Lang Syne?
I was there throughout, yes.
Yeah. What did you think of that?
Look, I think the whole thing has been handled well. I'm delighted that, you know, having had the referendum, having had the election, we have now got our sovereign parliament back. And I think democracy relies on the loser accepting the result of the majority. The majority wanted to leave. Thank goodness for the West Midlands and for the north of England, because they're the people with their feet on the ground. They voted for Britain to take back its sovereignty. We now have our sovereignty back. Boris Johnson's now got a mandate to go and negotiate in the interests of the British people the best deal that we can. And we hold all the cards. We have an £100 billion trade deficit with Europe. Ultimately, Europe's job should be to do what's in the best interests of the European citizens. Our job is to do what's in the best interest of the British citizens. I don't like the deal. I don't like the political declaration.
Well,
There's a lot wrong with it, but at the end of the day, we now have our sovereignty back.
It is, as you say, it's just a first step, because
the
we
ball
are
is now in
entering
Boris's
an
court
11-month
to
transition
negotiate
period,
the best
aren't we?
deal for the British people. And
so we don't know what that deal is going to look like yet. I mean, Pat, what's your feeling about how the kind of exit was handled, the kind of celebrations versus, for some, commiserations? I mean, there was a quote from the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen. You must have heard this, which was, in a way, quite moving. Only in the agony of parting do we look into the depths of love.
Well, I think how you see this, the emotions that you feel about it, depend on how you viewed the thing in the first place. I never thought Britain was some kind of put-upon colony of the EU. I never thought we weren't a free, independent country in the first place. So I never thought we needed liberating from the EU. So my emotions about it, to be honest, are sadness and regret, but also acceptance that that's the decision that the country made.
Yeah, and Fernando, I'm asking you to be the spokesperson for young people again, but how do you and your kind of friends and the people you work with feel about it?
I think for those of us who voted Remain, it's kind of a sense of, you know, this is what the public voted for. We live in a democracy, and respecting that decision. And I think what's been quite nice to see is, as people have been celebrating, whether they're Brexiteers, they've done it in a way that's been, you know, quite respectful, and nobody's been like, you don't have the right to be enjoying yourself. But I think now it's time to really look forward and see what can we get.
It's interesting you say that, because actually there was a lot of social media chat going on about this week, and we did have this tweet come in from Neil Phillips in Telford. He said, "I'm not celebrating even though I voted leave, because Brexit has proved hugely divisive, and I think a celebration is inappropriate." I mean, how do you feel about that, Rupert? I presume you think that Neil is wrong.
I think now it's time for Britain to come together. We are, after all, we're still European. We've only left the EU.
We haven't floated off into the Atlantic.
We're geographically, we can't leave the European people. We are a European people after all. So I think he's quite right. We need to now unite. We had the referendum, we had the general election. The British people have spoken. It's now up to everybody to unite and do what's right for this country. And at the end of the day, I've always thought the EU was a post-war, I know it was a post-war experiment to try and create one federal Europe. It was cloaked as a trade and a trade deal.
Few people think that
So
is the
built,
intention
it was
now,
founded
do they?
on deceit, and as a result, now it's going to fall apart. And it's right that
There was some triumphalism, wasn't there? And you do wonder whether some of the banners that say things like traitors and this sort of thing, whether that is helpful in kind of bringing the country back together.
Well, I think the country will come together now. I mean, the problem, I can honestly say to you, if the vote in the referendum had gone the other way, I would have accepted the Democratic majority.
But when you see
and
people
remember,
who come from your
remember,
worldview with those
Elizabeth,
sorts of things,
just
do you ever say to them,
I've got to make this point.
do you
Just
ever
remember,
say to them that I don't think that's a good idea, you maybe
David
shouldn't
Cameron
do that?
thought he was going to win that referendum when he called it. The establishment thought it was going to be a slam dunk, they were going to move on and we would remain in Europe. But the British people, and if you believe in democracy, were given a vote and they delivered their verdict.
Yes, so clearly, and then when we've just heard exactly the same from Fernanda, but as I was saying, do you, as a part of that winning group, if you want to call it that, do you ever say to people, look, that we need to be a bit kind of sensitive here if we're going to bring people back together?
Of course, I would have accepted the result, and I think now it's up to the people who, you know, everybody to work together in the interest of Britain. I run lots of businesses. We have people who, there are people who believe in remaining, there are people who believe in leaving. So one doesn't want to alienate anybody. We are, after all British. So let's do what's right for Britain, and we want to see our country flourish.
Well, there you go. So that is the British perspective. But of course, the other half of the story this week was unfolding in Brussels, where Rupert was for much of the time. Earlier, I spoke to the BBC's Peter Saul and started by asking him what the atmosphere had been like there.
Yeah, quite a strange couple of days, to be honest. We had that historic vote in the European Parliament where MEPs gave their final approval to the Brexit withdrawal agreement. There was the scenes of Nigel Farage and his Brexit Party colleagues waving goodbye to the EU with the Union Jack, much to the ire of many of the other MEPs in the chamber. And then the rather emotional rendition of Auld Lang Syne as British MEPs linked arms with their European counterparts and basically bade farewell to this town. There was champagne drunk, but also tears shed. And most of the MEPs that I've been speaking to have been in reflective mood, including the last ever Conservative MEP for the West Midlands, Anthea McIntyre.
We are, of course, leaving all the institutions of the European Union, and that is carrying out the wishes of the British people. But we're not leaving Europe. I mean, Europe is still only 22 miles off the south coast and very important to us. So we're leaving as friends and partners and looking forward to a good working relationship in the years ahead.
Now, she and the other 6 representatives from our region, along with their staff, of course, will have already cleared out their offices. And I think the general sentiment here in Brussels is that although we Brits have been a bit of a pain at times to deal with, they'll be sad to see us go. And we saw that in the Grand Place, the famous square in the centre of Brussels, the other night, and they projected the red, white and blue of the Union flag on the 4 corners of the square. So while there'll be plenty of Belgian beer sunk in Brussels, not much of it will be in celebration.
Attention turns, of course, to the future relationship, to the negotiations on how that is going to work over the next few years. What's being said about that?
Yes, an intense period of talks to come, really, much of which will happen here at the Berlaymont, the European Commission building. And an awful lot at stake, really. Quite a lot of scepticism here in the EU about whether it can be done in the time frame that is available. Of course, our government thinks that it is entirely possible to reach a trade deal by the end of the year. But a lot of people I'm speaking to here think there may have to be some form of an extension at the end of 2020. We'll have to wait and see. And there's an awful lot at stake, of course, for businesses and the wider economy in the West Midlands. Manufacturing, a very, very important part of our economy and the links that we currently have with Europe going forward. And that was a point that was very, very strongly made when I spoke to the Liberal Democrat MEP for the West Midlands, Phil Bennion.
It's absolutely essential that the government doesn't dig itself into holes over what sort of relationship we're going to have in the future, because we need check-free, tariff-free access across that boundary between the new UK customs area and the European one.
And we've heard a similar sentiment, really, from senior EU officials. I was at a news conference earlier where the European Council President Charles Michel said that the more that the UK diverges or moves away from EU rules, the less and less access it will have to the single market. So already a hint, perhaps, at the flashpoints that are still to come in the second phase of the Brexit saga.
OK, well, that was Peter Saul reporting from Brussels there, and we can have a look at the papers this morning. We've got noises coming out of Number 10 this morning talking about that future relationship. The Observer, Brexit Day 1, Johnson goes for broke with hardline trade deal. And there's another one here, if I can get it up. UK diplomats told to spurn old EU allies. So, I mean, I guess, you know, this is day 1, first day of negotiations, and I guess you'd say, Pat, they're kind of going hard, aren't they?
Well, we had the slogan, get Brexit done, and of course legally we've left, but in a sense the hard part starts now, because we are negotiating our future relationship with the EU. I mean, a couple of things I'd say about this. It's a very ambitious timetable. We've got lots of people saying it can be done now, it can be done in a few months. We heard that about the first phase. It could all be done in an afternoon, easiest deal ever, and so on. It didn't turn out like that. But the second thing is, there's been a lot of arguments about forecasts, about this will happen, that will happen. There's a lot of scepticism about that. I understand that. We're now going to be dealing not in forecasts, but in facts. And as long as we understand that having sued for divorce divorce has consequences and we don't let the thing descend into acrimony, then I hope we can get through this. I want my country to succeed in this new phase, but I'm also realistic that having sued for the divorce that's just begun, it's going to have consequences and we've got to face up to that.
Fernanda?
I think it's one thing that's been quite interesting when you're reading around is Brexit, it's just begun in terms of a journey, and there's a lot of things that they're aiming to achieve within this transition period, be it the actual free trade agreement, cultural implications, educational ties, and there's a lot of questions in terms of what will be prioritised and what will we have to see sort of get fixed here and there as we go on, which raises questions, especially for young people when you're planning your life and planning, you know, for example, if you're in science and you want to do research and development, how's that going to work? So I think we really need to make sure that as much as we prioritise trade, we make sure that things aren't left to fall by the wayside, because that will be very detrimental to our future industry leaders who will have to make the best of the Brexit that we do end up having.
I mean, it's interesting because, as you say, we now enter this 11-month period, and the trade negotiations, we've been told, the Prime Minister says there will be no extension. It has to be done by the end of 2020. There are differing opinions on that. Let's have a look now at Lord Bamford, who's the chairman of JCB, which is, of course, based in Staffordshire, talking earlier this week about the prospects of doing a deal.
I think it's highly possible to do it in a few months and not take a whole year over it. Of course, there are a lot of people that say it's impossible. I don't think there is. The principle of it is, are we going to have free trade between us and Europe working both ways or not?
Well, Izzy, that was Lord Bamford there with a very positive take. But is that really credible? I mean, there are lots of noises this morning about Britain wanting a Canada-style deal. It took 7 years to negotiate the trade deal between the EU and Canada.
Yeah, but we've got many more equal playing fields already, so I think there is an advance on that situation already. I mean, I think that I'm optimistic about it. I think we can get a deal done. I think the important thing for me is that the government listens and talks to not only business but local government about how that impacts on residents, on workforce, on the settled status, and making sure that we have a really strong role in helping our communities to shape the future.
You mentioned business, and of course the automotive sector is very, very important. I mean, JLR, Jaguar Land Rover have plants in Warwickshire as well, and other parts of the West Midlands, Solihull and Castle Bromwich. I mean, we know that the car industry is very, very worried about what the future relationship is going to look like.
Yeah, well, business has changed. It's much more about the immediacy of getting stock in, moving it on and getting it out. So I think there has to be a reflection on the current type of trading that we have and the ability to be flexible, to innovate as well. I mean, we're a fantastic innovating country. We need to make the most of that and make that work here, not just
it's all very well innovating, but then if there are barriers to research and development, to academics, to trade, I mean, is it credible, Rupert, that we can have the kind of ambitious deal that you're hungry for by the end of this year?
Of course it is, and I totally agree with Lord Bamford. But if you're a protectionist bloc like the EU is, and the more I learnt about it, I was on the Australia and New Zealand delegation, they have trade surpluses with virtually every country because they make it very difficult to do a trade deal. They like people to buy their cars, but then they don't reciprocally buy the produce of other countries. Now, there is a precedent to this. Greenland actually left the EU. We are the fifth or sixth. I put it to you that
Greenland's economy is rather different.
They left with the free trade deal, but we are the fifth or sixth biggest economy in the world. I've just said we've got a £100 billion trade deficit with Europe. It's in their interest to do a deal with us. And if they don't, they're letting down their European citizens. Now, let me just finish, because at the end of the day, they want to try and lock us in and punish us. And what we've got to do is, now we've voted to leave, we've got to create the conditions where Britain can flourish from leaving. What we don't want to do is tie our hands behind our back, stop us getting access to the growing markets in other parts of the world.
Fine, but every action has a consequence, doesn't it? Let's just have a little listen now to Professor David Bailey, who is kind of the premier expert on the UK automotive sector. Listen to this.
There is no upside from Brexit for the UK car industry. Over 50% of car exports leaving the UK go to the EU. It's by far the biggest market. What's essential for the car industry here is that as little as possible extra friction is introduced into trade with Europe, whether it's tariffs or non-tariff barriers, customs delays or different regulations.
And that's the key thing, isn't it, Reba? They don't want any friction. They really would like to keep things the same so they can move their products across the border, so that they can sell their cars. More than 50% of the cars produced in the UK are sold into Europe. But what you were saying about how we don't want our hands tied behind our back, if we diverge, so if we have our hands free, if we diverge in more areas, we will have less access to the European market.
What they're frightened of, Elizabeth, is two things. The first thing is that we make a success of Brexit. And let me tell you, there are a lot of other countries in the EU who will follow us. Denmark, other countries will watch very closely what happens with Britain. They're not happy in this undemocratic, centrally planned attempt to create a European superstate. So they want to effectively try and punish us. Even if it punishes their own people, that is the ethos within that European
Do you
Parliament.
really believe that? You believe that they want
totally
to punish us?
I've actually worked there
because before
for 8
you were
months.
talking about being conciliatory and working together, and that's in tone
Of
sounds
course, but
quite
as I
hostile.
say, why they are the ones who are trying to put up all the barriers. We've been trading with Europe for 45 years. It's very simple to actually continue that trade. If they're trying to put the barriers up, the analogy I use is a bit like the communists tried to stop people watching television to see how much better the standard of living was in the West. And that didn't work. The wall came down. And let me tell you, there's several bricks have come out of this wall now.
Okay.
And when it goes, it's going to go very quickly. A bit like the dam busters. When they hit the middle of the wall, it took a while, it cracked, and then the whole lot washed away. And there is no necessity for centrally planned superstates in the current interconnected world.
We could get into a huge debate there around whether that is now
Europe's
the political
trade
intention.
is falling.
But of course, Brexit isn't only going to be about the impact on business. We're going to carry on talking about this. But after more than 40 years, 45 years, of being a member of this club, it touches on many facets of our lives. Here's our reporter, James Pearson, with a quick take on what happens now.
Au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, do widzenia. So we're out. Well, technically we're out, but for the next 11 months, many parts of our lives will continue as if we're still in the EU. Between now and the 31st of December, the UK will be in a transition period to give both sides time to agree their future relationship. Until then, we'll still have to follow all the EU's rules, keep paying contributions to its budget, but we won't have any say at the top table. Right now, EU citizens continue to enjoy the same right to live and work in the UK, but that won't last forever. For those who want to stay after 2020, they'll have to apply for what's known as settled status. As for Brits heading off on holiday, for the next 11 months, everything stays the same. Documents like our passports, driving licences, insurance will all still be valid. But that could all change in 2021, depending on whether talks on our future relationship take off. As well as people, goods from West Midlands firms like JLR will still be able to flow freely during the transition period. But that's only in the short term. So what firms need to know, and quickly, is what the outcome will be of those key trade talks between the EU and UK. At the same time, the UK also hopes to negotiate new deals with other countries. That was one of the key arguments for Brexit in the referendum.
Okay, James Pearson reporting there, and sort of finishing with trade, which is where we left off. But with regard to other matters, Fernanda, are there particular areas that are of concern to you about the future relationship?
Definitely freedom of movement, in terms of, like what Pat said, when you have a divorce, you can't expect to have everything that you once had in that same relationship. But what we need to see is that people from all different backgrounds, whether they come from wealthy backgrounds or families that can afford, can also take advantage of the opportunities to understand other cultures, understand other businesses, and figure out how to take advantage of what you said, we're a global economy now, and being able to play and actually have a competitive advantage means understanding what your competitors are bringing to the table, and how you're supposed to understand that if you can't fully take advantage of those opportunities. So it'd be interesting to see what happens there.
So as an individual, perhaps you would be in favour of seeing freedom of movement continue, because that's, I mean, some people are talking about still campaigning for that and wanting to have that even within the context of our new relationship.
I think we need to have it to some extent because, for example, in the legal industry and the financial services, when you have to deal with clients in all different types of areas across Europe, you need to be able to move and attend to them very quickly. And the last thing that you'd want is to start lagging behind other areas, for example, France, who will be able to take advantage of that already. So there are a lot of questions in terms of what our relationship with financial services will look like, passporting, and even people wanting to work in different regions. So I think for me, as someone who's just starting out in their career and hopefully wanting it to be an international career, there's a lot of questions that need answers, and hopefully we get that in these discussions.
Pat.
Well, for the next year, there'll be no practical differences, as the film pointed out.
So we're still in the customs union, we're still in the single market.
As part of the agreed transition period. So all these practical consequences will be negotiated. We're told over the next year there's a possibility to extend that. The government says it won't. So we don't really know yet what practical differences there will be in a year's time, either for individuals or for businesses. But just watching that film, I was struck, we should spare a thought for the many British people who live in other European countries and the millions of Europeans who live here. Nobody did anything wrong in moving from member state to member state. They did this legally. They live and work there legally. And I think there'll be a number of people who are just wondering how this is all going to affect them in times to come, because these people, whether they're Brits abroad or Europeans living here, have come here legally, live here legally and work here legally.
I mean, Izzy, there are going to be, it's a negotiation, so we don't know exactly how it's going to look yet. And there is the potential for things to kind of be quite different and impact on people's lives going forward.
Absolutely, but we do understand there's going to be negotiations on a points-based system so that we will still get the best of the best coming through and our opportunities as well. And we currently live in a global world where we have a huge influx of people from all over the world, not just Europe, and vice versa. That, I'm sure, will be continuing. So the importance is that we share the knowledge and we share that experience. But I see that now, and I see that still continuing.
Yeah, is that problematic ultimately, Rupert? Because for some of the people who were voting for Brexit, as well as sovereignty, immigration was one of the things they were worried about.
Well, immigration has been a problem. There's no doubt immigration has happened without the government controlling it, and that's been part of the problem. I'm in favour of targeted immigration. I think any economy that shuts itself away and doesn't have any immigration actually does gradually atrophy. So I'm in favour of a properly points-based system where actually people who can make a contribution to our economy come in.
All right. OK, I'm really sorry, but we are going to have to call time there because we are running out of it. Well, whether you think Brexit has been done or not, I can absolutely guarantee that this will not be the last time we talk about it. We will be back next week at the same time. Have a very good rest of your Sunday. Bye-bye.